undisturbed for millions of years. No native humans, and the coldest place on Earth. A beautiful and silent frontier, home to penguins, seals, and whales. Earth's largest freshwater supply, minerals and other mysteries buried beneath the ice. This frozen continent became a source of conflict over ownership and then a model of compromise during the Cold War through the Antarctic Treaty. But can this compromise endure? Antarctica is promoted as a haven of peace, yet nations may already be pushing the boundaries of the treaty. History is full of explorations and conquests. Antarctica is no exception. In 1772, James Cook, a British naval captain, began his journey in search of a suspected landmass in the southern hemisphere. On January 9, 1773, Cook recorded that they had passed more ice islands than seen for several days. They were now so familiar to us that they were often passed unnoticed. Cook sailed just 75 miles short of discovering Antarctica, instead routing his ship to New Zealand for safe port. Cook recorded, "I had now made the circuit of the Southern Ocean in a high latitude, and traversed it in such a manner as to leave not the least room for the possibility of there being a continent, unless near the pole and out of the reach of navigation." Almost half a century after Cook missed Antarctica, Captain Bellingshausen of Russia sailed around the globe from 1819 to 1821 and spotted islands within the Antarctic Circle. Whaling Captain Nathaniel Palmer of the United States may have been the first man to see the mainland of Antarctica in 1820. At the International Geographical Conference in 1895, Antarctic exploration was promoted as the greatest piece of geographical exploration still to be undertaken. The race was on, but the conditions were harsh. Roald Amundsen's team from Norway relied on sled dogs and reached the South Pole in 1911. R.F. Scott and his team from the United Kingdom did not make it home from their expedition to the South Pole. In his last journal entry on March 29, 1913, R. Scott wrote, "Every day we have been ready to start for our depot 11 miles away, but outside the door of the tent remains a whirling drift. We shall stick it out to the end, but the end cannot be far." Although Scott's team had a tragic ending, exploration continued. Nations sent cartographers and scientists. Air flight enabled even more exploration. In 1948, the United States used helicopters to explore Antarctica, known as Operation Windmill. But conflict developed, especially between Great Britain, Chile, and Argentina. Who owned Antarctica? One nation, several nations, or no nation at all? In 1908, Great Britain made claims to the entire Antarctic continent and nearby islands, asserting ownership based on discovery and whaling use. Argentina rejected Great Britain's claims and instead asserted their own rights based on its proximity to the continent and its own occupation through weather stations. Not to be outdone, Chile staked its claim based in part on the continuation and submersion of the Andes Mountains. Despite extensive exploration by the United States, the U.S. government declined to assert or recognize sovereignty claims. It is the opinion of the department that the discovery of lands unknown to civilization, even when coupled with a formal taking of possession, does not support a valid claim of sovereignty unless the discovery is followed by an actual settlement of the discovered country. In 1948, Great Britain suggested settling claims through the International Court of Justice, but Chile and Argentina declined. That same year, the U.S. proposed no ownership but a trusteeship, which was also declined. In 1949, Australia proposed a regional agreement, again declined. The Soviet Union was not happy with the U.S. trying to steer Antarctic discussions without them, and considered asserting a claim. This was all happening during the Cold War. By 1957, 7 nations asserted ownership: Argentina, Australia, Chile, France, New Zealand, Norway, and the United Kingdom. In 1959, the United States invited 11 other nations to propose an agreement for Antarctica. All nations accepted, including the Soviet Union. In less than 2 months of negotiation, the parties were able to reach an agreement and the Antarctic Treaty was signed by 12 nations. Many more nations signed later. The treaty covers the region south of 60 degrees south latitude. The area is to be used for peaceful purposes only. No military bases or weapons. Nations are to freely share scientific information, and all areas are open to inspection. No party to the treaty gives up any previous claims of ownership. No new claims can be made while the treaty is in force. The Antarctic Treaty has been cited as an example of nations exercising foresight and working in concert to prevent conflict before it develops. President Eisenhower said that it should be viewed as an inspiring example of what can be accomplished by international cooperation in the field of science and in the pursuit of peace. One of the treaty's drafters, Lawrence Gould, likened the treaty's historical significance to the Magna Carta. The treaty served as a precedent and as a model for other treaties, including the 1967 Treaty to Prohibit Nuclear Weapons in Latin America, the 1967 Treaty Governing Outer Space, and the 1971 Treaty Prohibiting Nuclear Weapons on the Ocean Floor. President Nixon advised that the Seabed Treaty would prevent an arms race before it has a chance to start. It is undeniable that the Antarctic Treaty should take its place in history as a model of compromise during an era of great conflict. But can it stand the test of time? Fast forward 60 years to today. Tourism is rapidly increasing. Climate change concerns are pressing. And as ice melts, minerals, fresh water, and new scientific discoveries become more accessible. If the ban on commercial drilling expires, 200 billion barrels of oil are up for grabs. Last year, the New York Times reported that China and Russia were drastically scaling up their presence in Antarctica. In October of this year, China and Russia defeated a measure to protect wildlife. Officials said Russia and China were the key stumbling blocks, worried about compliance and fishing rights. China landed its first commercial jet just last month, perhaps soon overtaking U.S. tourism. Countries are concerned about China's increasing presence, but if China or other countries are testing the boundaries of the treaty, what can actually be done about it? The language of the treaty itself is deliberately ambiguous and vague. The regime has weak inspection, enforcement, and governance mechanisms, and has been slow to respond to conflict. Chinese law professor Guo Peking astutely analogized the current state in Antarctica to a chess match. He said, China's exploration of the continent is like playing chess. It's important to have a position in the global game. We don't know when the play will happen, but it's necessary to have a foothold. Developments in Antarctica in the last decade suggest that another race is on. The outcome affects each one of us. Before the Antarctic Treaty or its related agreements expire, nations need to compromise again. A mechanism for enforcing the treaty is essential for our very welfare.